Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Pentiment on PS5. It is difficult to imagine, but there was a time long before the advent of the printing press where only the rich could afford books, or to learn to read at all. Learned scholars and monks were the only ones who did the writing, the reading, and the translating. And the most prized of these tomes were illuminated manuscripts, where the margins are full of doodles and cartoons, pregnant with meaning scholars in our modern day are still trying to figure out. This is a tale of those times, and of a man who made his living making some of those illustrations for wealthy patrons. Let's discuss this with 2022's Pentiment. And speaking of patrons, this episode is brought to you by the patrons of Deleted Saves. If you would like to join their illustrious ranks, please go to patreon.com and look for Deleted Saves Podcast. My patrons are a small but dedicated bunch, and I thank them and value them greatly. I'm sure they would like a few more folks to commiserate with, too. Don't worry, gang. I'll shout you out at the end of the show, like I always do. I honestly never thought I would get to review this title. It was an Xbox exclusive, and I get it. PlayStation does exclusives all the time, and if Microsoft owns the studios, it gets to have exclusives too. I have nothing against Xbox. I just don't own one because they really don't have much I wanted to play so far this generation. And most Xbox games can be gained on PC, such as through Steam or GOG, unlike PlayStation. But I'll be honest with you, dear listener. As many PC games as I've played over the years, I don't much like playing games on home computer. It's not very convenient for me, and I have to spend even more money and time constantly upgrading an aging PC just to play more recent games, which means convenience is even less of a factor. If you love PC gaming, you do you. Next time you want me to drop $600 on a graphics card just so the ray tracing looks more realistic, I'm going to tell you to fuck all the way off with that bullshit. However, in the great Microsoft buyouts of the last few years, Obsidian Entertainment, one of my favorite studios, got put behind the Microsoft paywall, and I figured that I would never play anything of theirs again. Hey, this is business after all. It happens. But a year or so ago, Phil Spencer, Xbox gaming CEO and grifter extraordinaire, as are so many who work in games, decided to extend an olive branch to non-Microsoft players by allowing 4 games to go multi-platform. And I have nothing against Mr. Spencer personally, either, except that I happen to share a name with him, and he's about as blithering and slime-coated as Bobby Kotick and Jim Ryan. But otherwise, it's nothing personal. Pentiment is one of those 4 games, and it arrived on the PlayStation Store about a year or so after its Xbox release. I had an interest in this title because of its art style, a game drawn and animated entirely as an illustrated manuscript. The illustrated manuscript is a large document, typically liturgical in nature, where the word or script takes the center of the page, and the wide margins are full of lavishly drawn images and doodles, usually of whatever took the illustrator's fancy, but are also possessed of deep symbology, such as things like rabbits and swords, knights riding snails, or men blowing trumpets out of their asses. I wish I could say I was kidding on that. We don't know all of what it means, even in the 21st century, but they are often meant to be things like religious arguments, statues or statuses of battles and wars, and often the news of the day that may or may not have been accurate or even current. Illustrated manuscripts were in production, usually by artists and monks, for several centuries between the 1200s and the 1500s, but eventually became a dying art thanks to the invention of the printing press, which made books easier to come by and much cheaper, but without the year's worth of fancy drawings. However, these documents need not be only religious texts, but were also legal documents, royal proclamations, charters, and deeds to large properties. In many ways, these illustrations were some of the art world and Western history's first comic books. The characters may not be going bang, power, zap, but the images are just as freeform and fantastical. Illustrated manuscripts are one of my favorite pre-Renaissance, end of the Byzantine years period in Western art history, and I could absolutely gush about them for hours on end. But sadly, that is a very dry and academic and a bit beyond a short form podcast about sprites and chiptunes and the happy brain chemicals they produce. But this was a passion project for Josh Sawyer, one of the original brains behind the original Fallout 3 when it was still a Black Isle Studios property. And he had his lead design hand in Icewind Dale 2 and Fallout New Vegas. So he's no slouch in the role playing game department. But I am hesitant to call Pentiment a role playing game. Well, there are some sort of stats you can choose that affect dialogue choices, such as what your main character studied and what king he studied it under. There is no combat or leveling up mechanics, no fantasy monsters or sci-fi alien bullshit. None of the usual stuff we've been drilled into accepting as necessary in a video game role-playing as entertainment. I would say, if anything, Pentiment is a murder mystery whodunit, set against the backdrop of the Holy Roman Empire in the 1500s, and all that that entails. And if you don't know, it wasn't exactly the nicest of times. War, plague, religious upheaval, absolute monarchies, and not a cell phone in sight. People just living in squalor and dying in the moment. We follow the life and times of one Andreas Mahler, master artisan working, for a few moments anyway, as a secular art specialist at the Curacao Abbey outside of the village of Tassing in Bavaria. Andreas is a man of many dreams, as he is young when we first meet him, and is hoping to use his masterpiece to catch the eye of a wealthy patron in a major city such as Prague or Paris. He is unhappy with his current work, but a friendly monk, Brother Piero, asks him to stay on just a bit longer to finish his work. Things go very wrong when a local baron, a longtime patron of the arts and of Curacao Abbey, shows up to check on his latest illustrated manuscript order and is subsequently murdered, with all the blame pointing at Brother Piero. And Andreas jumps into the role of detective to save his friend and mentor. However, at this point, I have to share something with you listeners. Pentiment is not a linear series of events that will play out exactly the same for everyone all the time. I know what choices I made throughout the game, what to investigate and who to talk to in what order that may have opened up or cut off entire avenues of investigation, and I'm not sure I made all the right choices. I damn well know I failed most of the persuasion checks in this game, and had to go off of what I had already gained as knowledge to try and solve the cases presented. And that may have completely fucked up my getting the best outcomes. But Pentiment isn't about that. It is a game about decisions and consequences with no fail states and no save scumming. So you will absolutely have to live with the consequences of whatever you say or do not say. And when I say choices, I mean people died. Quite a disturbing number, in fact. Justice was harsh back then. I also cannot give the proper play-by-play, as I'm far from sure I chased down every thread or followed every path. I can only speak from my own investigation, my own exploration of the time and lives and generations that living in Tassing, as the village will be the whole of our world and of this game's setting. But Tassing is far more than it seems, with deep secrets both above and below the ground, hidden skeletons in most everyone's collective closets, and no one except the small children is innocent or without blood on their hands. Pentiment is also broken up into 3 large investigations. There's no way I can talk about what I experienced without major spoilers, but there will hardly be the extent of all the spoilers in the game. These are just events as they happen to my Andreas. So here we go. The first investigation ended when I did save the life of Piero, but at the cost of having one of the other monks messily and publicly beheaded. And I am far from sure that he was the culprit. Pentiment does not direct you to one single right or wrong choice. There are no easily obtained answers, and you, the player, must decide if you should act based upon best knowledge, and if you can live with your choices. After this, Andreas leaves for a large city and wealthy patronage. He is married off, and time and seasons pass. In the second investigation, Andreas is much older, in his 40s. when he returns to Tassing on the way back home to Nuremberg, with his apprentice Caspar in tow. Andreas is a broken man, disillusioned by his work for the wealthy, as all they want is vainglory and political points for having Andreas paint their portraits as gods and generals, but they do not want art. They want talking points to show off at their house parties. But neither does he want to return to his home. His marriage is loveless, and, as it is revealed in time, his young son died of the plague. And now the village of Tassing is on the verge of revolt, as the results of the events of the first investigation have caused upheaval at the abbey, and a new abbot is taxing the peasants into abject poverty outside of the new baron's knowledge. Another murder, this time of the leader of the peasants, named Otto, a man Andreas knew as a mere boy a few years earlier. And the even bigger conspiracy that led to Otto's murder. It turns out it had a lot to do with the ties to the Roman ruins beneath the village. But every single person who is possibly responsible for the murder is dirty as fuck for different reasons. And again, I am not sure I made the right choice. I know I did not get one of the suspects executed because he was stealing from the abbey for the right reasons, and the other I did not want to throw to the wolves because she was fucking a married monster of a man. The third suspect died because I honestly didn't know what else to do, but he seemed like the likeliest suspect. But this sets off the peasant revolt, which gets ugly fast. I don't know if there was a way out of it, and a lot of the villagers died, monks too, when the Baron's soldiers rode in and commenced a slaughter, meaning that they were there to put down any rebellion. And here's a huge twist, folks. Andreas dies in the fire the rioters set in the Abbey scriptorium, its library, trying to save his one real love, the precious illuminated manuscripts and books. The third and final mission stars a late-game main character switch, a young woman named Magdalena, who was a mere toddler during the second mystery. She is the daughter of Klaus, the town printer, the man who was sort of responsible for the events of the second mystery and for putting the Abbey out of business. She dreams of life in the big city, but she is an artist and printmaker stuck in tiny Tassing. When a mysterious stranger mortally clubs her father over the head during a botched robbery, it is a race against time for her to find the responsible party and to take over her father's last great job, painting the history of Tassing as a mural in the new council building. Magdalena will be as adept an investigator as Andreas, but as she is not an outsider here, she has an advantage. But she is the one who finally discovers that all of these murders have been deeply tied to the Roman ruin beneath the town. In a simple and, well, truthful secret that one person has found very threatening to their power and their Christian faith. Magdalena digs too deep and uncovers the truth. And in her father's final hours, she discovers one final secret. The figure who has been stalking her for months since her father's attack is in fact Andreas Mahler, now a man in his 60s, who has spent the last 20 years hiding beneath the town in the Roman tunnels. I question if this is in fact the truly correct result, but I'm going to run with it. Pentiment is that kind of game where I do not want to know if this is the right path or not. He's not responsible for Klaus's death, but he plans to avenge it. And it turns out we finally discover the real culprit of the game, or at least my game. Father Thomas, priest of the village church separate from the abbey. He knew the real history of Tassing, and he was too worried it would erode the faith of the citizens. He was ready to die to protect that secret, and he was ready to kill to keep it buried. All of those deaths are on his hands. And what was that secret? The secret is the two local saints the peasants had kept close to their hearts for decades, if not centuries now, were based entirely on the Roman gods Mars and Diana. They were made up. They were total bullshit. They never existed, nor did their exploits ever occur. But those who came long after the Romans fled the area and found the ruins and remains of statues conflated their pagan beliefs with misunderstood and now forced new Christian beliefs. And in a harsh and unfair land, that faith kept the locals going long after they would have given up and left. It was proof that God was active in their lives and had a plan for them. None of it was real. None of it is ever real. And now, even if Andreas and Magdalena outright tell the people the truth, none of it will matter because the lie is too big, too much of a monster of its own no one person can slay. It is the inverse of the fantasy role-playing game. Your characters worked all game long, gained power and influence, just to have to quit and go home or leave when they find out that there was no real monster or big bad guy. It was all around them the whole time in the hearts and minds of the very people they were supposed to be saving. And that's how it ended. Andreas confronts the decisions he made and makes what peace he can with himself. And Magdalena leaves her for her big city life. Not because she wants to now, but because she has to. Her father is dead. She cannot inherit his property because she is female in the 1500s and is unmarried. And she now knows too much. But at least she completes the mural, and Andreas even added a little bit as well, in her honor, before he too leaves Tassing forever. Critics gave Pentiment generally favorable reviews, and it sits at 88 out of 100 on Metacritic. Reviewers enjoyed the historic details and the replayability, as well as the art style that made, as some room temperature IQ at Polygon put it, the game have a sense of style for what would have been an otherwise dry historic topic. Look, folks, I'm not saying you can't enjoy a kegger in a football game or some sort of other turn your brain off activity, but whoever that was a real knuckle-dragging dipshit. But then again, it is Polygon. These shitbags love clickbait, not doing their fucking jobs. At no point should we trust game reviewers. Not even me, folks. But at least I tell you outright that this is just my opinion, not a fact. And I'm not trying to place myself as an expert on anything. Just because you have your name in a byline doesn't mean you aren't an idiot or human garbage. But it did well overall in the game's media. But here's what I think, regardless of that group of stooges. Pentiment is a very impactful game. Not just because of its art style, which is frankly unique in the game space, possibly one of a kind at this time. It is a divisive choice, I am sure, but it was an inspired one. But it also humanizes a time period we, for the most part, think of as a backward, uncivilized, lost age of Western civilization. Sure, the great empires of Asia, the Middle East, and large swaths of Africa were, at this time, wealthier and better educated, despite white historic thought on the matter. But these people were far from the backward, cousin-fucking illiterate populace we've allowed ourselves to believe they were. Even these fictional ones in a murder mystery game. A lot of this has to do with the western fall of Rome, and with no one to tell these new settlers to the region that once held in the iron grip of the Caesars what the stuff they left behind was. And the people just had to do their best. One of these was Christianity, which came in with the sword, whether Christians like to regard that fact or not, instead of with peace, as it was supposed to be. And when the sword no longer worked, hard coin and false beliefs did. You see, Pentiment was not wrong in its last statements. Christianity, which is the bedrock of the world the characters of the game inhabit, is a great chameleon. We know damn well most pagan celebrations or gods we readapted into saints or holidays, celebrating great moments in the far away from Western Europe, the Middle Eastern New Testament, which itself is a refutation in a way of the hated Jewish Old Testament, yet using that even older document as its foundation. We know that Yahweh, the name for God in Judaism, was a repurposed Sumerian storm god who was lifted up into the heart of a monotheistic culture. Which makes sense. A people enslaved over and over, of course they would want a god of revenge and thunder to help make sense of their lives. Much of the New Testament was written 20 to 90 years after the death of Jesus of Nazareth. Of course, after that much time, they would get shit wrong, or have politicized it by then, which is what happened. And when a man who believes himself a god among men with an endless army at his back rolls through saying all of his actions come from a power higher than all and nothing he does is wrong, and even death is a victory, you can't fight that with words or blades. and a confused and desperate people will cling to anything to get through dark and perilous times, even old myths reforged into a modern tale of victory after death, when they should be running from an obvious death cult. But, as I said, the monster has grown too big, the lore is too big to fail. And, of course, Christianity is not the only religion that does this, so don't feel so superior about whatever invisible force or life current or whatever you worship or ascribe your morality to. In the words of George Carlin, it's all bullshit, and it's bad for you. And to keep the truth hidden, many have killed and died. For power, for money, for misguided faith, for good intentions gone very bad. Living in the wreckage of the Age of Enlightenment, the Industrial Age, the Computer Age, the Age of Reason has done nothing to change or alleviate that fact. In fact, it drives many more towards longing for a new dark age of American Christian jihad, keeping the myths of old alive long after they have had any use. Only death is real. Only what we do in the now and how we treat others in the now matters. And me telling you this about a fucking video game I played will not affect the damn thing and certainly not change any hearts or minds. Pentiment is a good game, a great game. It may not be a game for you, but what it tried in its short time is important. I'm glad it got unlocked from being an exclusive. It proves there's still more in this medium to explore, artistically, creatively, and in a storytelling fashion. If we can decouple ourselves from the myth of ratings and thumbs up or thumbs down reviews, it might stand a chance to grow further. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Mass Lama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.